In 1934, there was a nervous excitement abuzz in the science labs around the world. Italian-American physicist Enrico Fermi's experiments had just led to the first nuclear chain reaction, and soon after led to the discovery of nuclear fission in 1942. He joined physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, whose mission it was to fashion nuclear weapons out of uranium isotopes and plutonium. Oppenheimer's team was in a race with the Nazis to create the first atomic bomb, drop it over Hiroshima. Japan would then surrender and end World War II. But the bombing of Hiroshima was not the first atomic bomb detonation. The first was in Alamogordo, New Mexico, approximately 3 weeks earlier. Although it was a dress rehearsal, and not the annihilation experienced in Japan, many New Mexicans suffered devastating health problems then, in 1945, and continued today, 70 years later. The citizens were not informed, warned, or evacuated. Most had no idea they were exposed, and didn't relate their sicknesses to exposure until many years later. As Oppenheimer, Fermi, and their team clandestinely planned and executed their test, those who were in the vicinity or nearly 100 miles downwind suffered the ill effects of radiation exposure. At 5:30 a.m. in the remote Alamogordo, New Mexico, the man known as the father of the atom bomb looked on in horror, and knew that with success came a bittersweet realization. He said, "We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few cried, and most people were silent. I remember the line from the Hindu scripture," he said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. The Trinity test director Kenneth Bainbridge's words are the most telling. He remarked, "Now we're all sons of bitches." Witnessing sheer devastation capability of their creation was overwhelming. The Trinity test was just one of many, many more to follow. The next time it would do what it was designed for. It killed approximately 90,000 souls in Hiroshima and critically injured thousands more. In the aftermath of World War II came the Cold War, which led to the superpowers stockpiling nuclear weaponry. It was then necessary for the U.S. government to mine uranium, and lots of it. Approximately half of the recoverable uranium in the U.S. lies in New Mexico, and of that, half rests beneath sacred Navajo lands. Beginning in 1947, the Navajos dug what was required for the U.S. stockpile of nuclear weapons. But of that uranium, only 1% is usable, the other 99% is discarded near the site. Some piles grow to nearly a mile long and over 50 feet high. On windy days, the dust from the piles blows incessantly through the native communities, depositing a sickly layer on the already scarce vegetation. It poisons the limited water supply and is inhaled unknowingly by lungs of men, women, and children, all the while being assured that the dust was harmless, not to worry. Later, much later, 30 years to be exact, in 1978, that statement from the Atomic Energy Commission was refuted by the Nuclear War Task Force, who released the grim report stating that those living near the waste piles ran twice the risk of lung cancer. Soon after, it was reported in the Navajo Times that 1 of 6 miners had died, and most would likely die prematurely of lung cancer. The companies had no safety or pollution regulations, and the Navajo men had no jobs after the war, so labor was cheap and plentiful. Nearly all miners were Navajo. They were routinely sent into freshly blasted tunnels to inhale black dust, often 100 to 1,000 times the safety limit, but no one was monitoring the sites. In 1979, just a year after health risks were exposed, the largest nuclear explosion in the United States occurred. The biggest explosion of radioactive material was on the Navajo Nation, the Churchill spill. 3 hours later, radioactivity was detected 50 miles away in Gallup, New Mexico. Only 12 hours before the explosion, then President Jimmy Carter had proposed a plan for more mining uranium. It is disturbing to find out that much of the damage and disease was preventable. Both the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and the U.S. Public Health Service had conducted a series of studies that began decades earlier in 1950 and were again updated in 1970. The studies focused on the causes of death, and the diseases that ranked the highest were lung cancer, pneumonia, tuberculosis, emphysema, and double the instances of injury-related deaths. clinical proof of what had been speculated. Although the awareness and regulations came too late for many, decades later we adhere to many of those regulations. By the time uranium mining finally petered out in the 1980s, hundreds of Indian miners had already died of exposure. Hundreds of nuclear tests have been done since the Trinity test, which has essentially deemed every one of us a downwinder. And sadly, radioactive waste will likely be present in the cells of our great-grandchildren's babies that have not yet been born. It has made its way to every conceivable corner of the earth. Now getting rid of it is the problem.